What's going on, guys? Welcome back. And today I am going to be bringing you my ranking of everything I saw in 2022. I saw a lot of things this year, a good bit more than I did by the end of last year. For comparison's sake, my 2021 ranking only consisted of 19 movies and TV shows, whereas this list consists of 33 movies and TV shows in total, which is a lot, and since I have so much to cover, I won't be spending a lot of time talking about certain movies or TV shows on this list, because I've already discussed a decent number of them in great depth already, although there are a few that I haven't talked about before that I would like to give you my thoughts on. Of course, there will be some unpopular opinions or hot takes on this list, but hey, what else is new? Without further ado, let's get into it. Now, at number 33, the very worst thing that I saw in 2022 was The Adam Project. Now, if some of you forgot this movie existed, then I can't say I blame you, because I tried to completely erase it from my memory, but unfortunately I had to dig that memory back up for this video. This film was some weird Netflix production with Ryan Reynolds time traveling and meeting a younger version of himself, and it just fails on every level. It tries to be self-aware and fourth wall breaking, but the humor is just so lowbrow and unoriginal. It's constantly referencing better movies from the 80s and even in recent years that I would much rather be watching than this piece of garbage. Really, I don't remember all that much about it, but I do remember loathing the experience of watching it. Yes, it's Morbin time, because at number 32, I have Morbius. Now, I heard nothing but bad things about this movie after its release, and after I finally watched it, I understood why, although I can't deny that I found this movie hilarious. It is one of the most rushed and cobbled together movies I think I've ever seen. Characters' decisions don't make any sense, nor do they correlate to what their previous actions were in the plot. The post-credit scene was amazing, with the Vulture inexplicably appearing in Morbius' universe and claiming he needs his help to fight Spider-Man, even though he defended Spider-Man at the end of Homecoming. It actually takes a lot of effort to write a script that nonsensical and contrived. At number 31, I have Obi-Wan Kenobi. Oh boy, Obi-Wan Kenobi. At the beginning of this year, this was my least anticipated Star Wars project, because I didn't see how they could make a story focused on Obi-Wan and Darth Vader in between the prequel and original trilogies actually work. And to make a long story short, it didn't work. I was not prepared for how truly awful this series was. It was so cheaply made, poorly acted, and badly written, causing severe damage to the overarching Star Wars story. Really, the only things that save it are a competent musical score and a few interesting concepts that don't go anywhere by the end of the show. At number 30, I have Moon Knight. What can I say? It's another Marvel show. If you're a Marvel fan, you'll probably like it, but as a not huge fan of Marvel, I didn't like it all that much. I found it moderately interesting at first. The main character having a split personality disorder was something unique and kind of compelling. I also appreciated how seemingly disconnected it was from the rest of the MCU franchise, but unfortunately, it just evolves into the same shooty-shoot, punch-punch lasers CGI battle that we're used to from Marvel that completely undermines the rest of the story. So, in the end, the show had no value, and I can't say I found any of it to be particularly memorable. Oh boy, coming in at number 29, I've got Werewolf by Night, yet another bad Marvel product. I would not have watched this if I hadn't heard that one of my favorite composers, Michael Giacchino, had directed it. And as a huge fan of his, I knew that filmmaking was one of his passions, so I was curious to see what he would do behind the camera for the first time. And I will say that this special was competently made, at least. It didn't overuse CGI to the same extent that some Marvel products do, but it still suffers from many of the same problems that we're used to. The inconsistent tone, bad humor, and forced drama. Since a lot of the character development is condensed into 50 minutes, I can't say I was particularly invested in any of the characters involved. I will say that the behind-the-scenes documentary for it, Director by Night, was far more interesting to me than the special itself. It goes more into Giacchino's background in filmmaking and how he got to this point, which I found quite fascinating and kind of inspiring, in all honesty. At number 28, I have Murdoch Mysteries Season 15. If you guys didn't know, I really like Murdoch Mysteries. I think it's a solid and highly entertaining show. With that being said, Season 15 is the worst of the seasons I've seen. It starts out okay, picking up where Season 14 left off, which was an interesting plotline, but it completely drops the ball with the ending, which is in my opinion the worst finale of the entire series. There's no real twist or cool investigation on Murdoch's part. He literally just bops the villain on the head. I wish I was kidding about that. The cliffhanger ending also doesn't go anywhere because Season 16 takes it in the lamest direction possible. This is quite disappointing because up until this point, I thought Murdoch was a really good show, but it's taken a bit of a nosedive as of late. At number 27, I have The Book of Boba Fett, quite possibly the biggest disappointment of the year for me. I was really looking forward to this show, and for the first half of it, I thought it was quite good, until a completely different character hijacks the show. But everyone's already talked about that, I've already talked about that, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it here. It's just such a shame, because this series had so much potential, and I thought it was living up to that potential for the first half. But at the end of the day, it's a gigantic mess. At number 26, I have the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special. Yet another Marvel product, but I found this one to be mildly entertaining. The visual presentation is just as bland as I've come to expect from Marvel at this point, and the dumb characterization mixed with a nonsensical plot certainly didn't help any. I hate Drax. He is a relentlessly irritating character who no longer has any integrity. Initially, he was kind of a dumb brute, but who did have somewhat of a tragic past. But at this point, his only purpose is to spew dumb jokes and say kind of insulting and rude things. Also, I guess he's bulletproof now, which reduces the already low stakes of this franchise. The ending of the special didn't make any sense to me either, because it revolves around the reveal of Mantis being Star-Lord's sister, despite the fact that in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Ego states that he killed every one of his children who didn't carry his superpowered gene. And don't give me the bullcrap about how he kept Mantis alive because she had the ability to put him to sleep. I don't buy for a second that that guy would keep her alive for any reason. Despite all that, I did have some fun with this special. That might just be because Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is my favorite MCU film. I don't know. It still wasn't that good, but I found it to be somewhat watchable, at least compared to the other Marvel products this year that I watched. At number 25, I've got LEGO Star Wars Summer Vacation. I've already talked about this one, but it was exactly what it needed to be, a fun time waster of 40 minutes. It's not super special, but not particularly bad. At number 24, I've got Cobra Kai Seasons 4 and 5. Yes, we got 2 seasons of Cobra Kai this year, and in my opinion, Season 4 was pretty bad, easily the worst one so far, but Season 5 brought things up a notch. It's easily the best since Season 2, although I wish they'd just end the show at this point, because they're finding every possible way in which to drag out this show, to a point where they are directly ignoring the events that happened in prior seasons in order for the story to work. It's kind of sad, because while the first 2 seasons weren't great, there was some subtlety in the way that it explored themes and characters. But at this point, there's no real subtlety anymore. There is some entertainment to be found, but it is disappointing to see how much of a decline this show has gone through. At number 23, I have Miss Marvel, quite easily the best MCU product of this year. And I do feel kind of bad for putting it so low on this list because I did enjoy quite a few things about it. For example, the likable characters, naturally implemented humor, and stylistic and creative visuals for once within the Marvel franchise. But unfortunately, this show is held back significantly by some bizarre pacing and an unfocused narrative, which is a result of the fact that Marvel keeps limiting these shows to being 6 episodes in length. There is so much story material crammed into a limited runtime, which holds this show back from achieving its true potential. Coming in at number 22, I have Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Roderick Rules, the new animated 2022 version of the film. And just like the Diary of a Wimpy Kid film from last year, there's nothing particularly special about it, but I still had a good bit of fun with it. I enjoy the animation style, and there were a lot of charming and heartwarming moments. Overall, it was a fun way to spend a little over an hour, but I can't say I see myself revisiting this at all in future. At number 21, I have Lightyear, yet another film that I've already talked about on the channel. I think it's an entertaining animated film, but a pretty weak Pixar film. The animation is stellar as per usual, and a lot of the humor landed for me, but the message is too blatantly obvious without the usual layers of subtlety we've come to expect from Pixar. Overall, it's a fun time, but really does fail to stand out amongst the crowd. At number 20, I have Top Gun Maverick, which I stand by is the most overrated movie of 2022. For a single watch, it was an entertaining viewing experience, and it is a competently made film. But there are several blatantly obvious flaws in the writing. The story is incredibly cliché and predictable, and on top of that, Maverick is an extremely unengaging protagonist. All of those elements combined make for a film that is entertaining, sure, but that is slowly disappearing from my memory, and which I have felt no desire to revisit. At number 19, I have The Sound of 007, a James Bond documentary which walks you through the different songs of each James Bond era. And I found this documentary quite interesting, not only as a music fan, but also as someone who isn't super familiar with James Bond. I've only really seen the Craig films, so I enjoyed learning more about these different songs and scores, although I was quite disappointed that they discussed every single song from the Daniel Craig era, except for my favorite, You Know My Name by Chris Cornell. At number 18, I have the film that I just most recently watched, The Bad Guys, a film about a bunch of criminal animals who love being bad and can't possibly imagine being good. This film follows an extremely done-to-death story structure, but it is elevated by some fantastic animation, which is quite similar to Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, but also distinct in its own way. I also appreciated how self-aware a lot of the film is, which helped make up for some of the more childish jokes. Overall, this is yet another very entertaining animated film from this year, although I can't quite call it great, due to how cliché and predictable a lot of it is. At number 17, I have the third and final season of Lock and Key. Now, Lock and Key is a show that I talked about way back in the summer before the third season even came out, but unfortunately, I just never had time to cover this season because it is by far my favorite of the three. Now, don't get me wrong. This show is awful if held under any level of scrutiny, and this season is quite possibly worse than anything else below it on this list. But I just have so much fun watching this show. It is one of the most entertaining viewing experiences I have had this entire year. This season is just absolute absurdity from start to finish. What if I were to tell you that there's a plot line in this season where the ghost of the guy who killed the main character's dad possesses the body of a demon revolutionary soldier and then teams up with the heroes? Would you believe me? I don't think so. You just have to watch the show for yourself. By the way, an actor from this show actually liked one of my posts on Instagram, so that must count for something. At number 16, I have Elvis, the biopic directed by Baz Luhrmann, whose work I'm a pretty big fan of, particularly on The Great Gatsby from 2013. And he brings his usual flair to this film. It was very entertaining and well made overall, although I will admit the length was a bit much for me at over 2 hours and 40 minutes. And I feel like once you've seen one of these musical biopics, you've kind of seen them all. At this point, I've watched this, Bohemian Rhapsody, and Rocketman. Rocketman is probably my favorite of the three, and the lives of all of these artists were quite similar. So of course they can't change the events of their lives, but these films do kind of blend together for me. Moving on to number 15, I have Death on the Nile. I think this is just a pretty underrated, fun murder mystery. I know a lot of people didn't like Murder on the Orient Express, but I liked that film as well, and I think this one is honestly better in a lot of ways. It takes a lot of cool twists and turns in the story, which I didn't see coming, and although it isn't quite as refined or uniquely original as another certain murder mystery you'll see higher up on this list, I still find it cool that people like Kenneth Branagh are out there making these more old-fashioned style murder mysteries. At number 14, I have Tales of the Jedi, the newest animated Star Wars series, which is really elevated by some fantastic animation, a killer soundtrack, and all of the story that's dedicated to Dooku. Everything with Ahsoka, I found to be kind of mixed. I wasn't the biggest fan of some of the directions they took her character in. Overall, this is a concept rich with potential, which I would love to see them explore in future, but as of right now, the result is pretty good, but it could be even better. At number 13, one of the biggest surprises of the year for me, A Christmas Story Christmas, which is a really bad title, but I have done a review of the original Christmas Story film, and if you had seen that review, you would know that it's one of my favorite Christmas movies and comedies of all time. So when I heard they were making a sequel after almost 40 years, I was definitely not looking forward to it. However, I was pleasantly surprised by the end result. It was a lot of fun. It does have the typical nostalgic callbacks to the original film that you expect from these legacy sequels or reboots, but they didn't rely on them too much to the point where it didn't have its own identity as a film. The directions they took a lot of the characters from the original film in were quite funny and surprising. This one was just a total blast, and I was not expecting it to be. At number 12, I have Light and Magic, a 6-part series documenting the creation and rise to prominence of ILM, or Industrial Light and Magic, the visual effects company which has worked on like every film ever. And I don't have a lot to say about it other than the fact that I found it quite fascinating and inspiring to see how they started out so small and grew to the point where they are now. I would highly recommend checking it out. At number 11, I have Nope. Now, I was not familiar with Jordan Peele as a director before watching this film. I haven't seen Get Out or Us, but judging this film purely on its own merits, I thought it was really good. It balances its tone extremely well between being a horror film and a comedy. It's extremely funny while containing some pretty disturbing elements. The scene I'll never be able to get out of my head is one featuring a monkey. Those of you who have seen the film will know what scene that is, and it also has a lot of interesting commentary on the exploitative nature of the film industry. It was just really well done. If you haven't seen this film yet, I would highly recommend checking it out. I'm not a huge horror movie guy myself, but this one really got under my skin. Bringing us into the top 10, I have The Banshees of Inisherin, brought to us by the same director of In Bruges, yet another film starring Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson. And this film is just as good, if not better, than In Bruges. It's quite funny while also providing some dark commentary on the complexity of friendship and the lengths we're willing to go to for it. Although I did find what Brendan Gleeson's character ends up doing quite disturbing, and some of the humor just wasn't really for me, that does not change the fact that this film needs to be watched. At number 9, I have The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, a series that I got a lot out of as a huge Middle-earth fan, but I can understand some of the criticisms aimed at it, although I think it's far from bad. The cinematography, score, and performances are all fantastic. However, there were some strange writing choices. I was quite baffled by some of the narrative decisions they made, but I will stand by my position that this was a solid season of television which just failed to be as good as it could have been. At number 8, I have Andor, the show that seemed to take the world by storm because it was so much better than it had any right to be. It's not your typical shoot-'em-up space adventure within the galaxy of Star Wars. It was a far more carefully constructed and subtle story about the moral complexity of rebellion and the lengths that people are willing to go to in order to tear down fascist governments. Some people didn't like that because they said it didn't feel like Star Wars, but me personally, I'm just happy for there to finally be a good live-action Star Wars show. Despite that, I think it is slightly overhyped due to how fatigued we were from bad Star Wars content. This show felt like a masterpiece, while it does have some problems. I still far prefer some of the animated shows like Clone Wars and Bad Batch, although I would say Andor gives Rebels a run for its money. All in all, despite it being slightly overhyped, Andor stands out as being one of the best shows of this year. At number 7, I have Everything Everywhere All at Once, and this is when half of you click off the video because I didn't put it at number 1. Now hear me out. I enjoyed this film and appreciated how it used a larger-than-life concept to tell a far more personal and intimate story about relationships, whatever form those may take. However, the hype surrounding this film is incredibly exaggerated. The amount of people I've heard saying this is not only the best film of the year, but the best of all time is insane. Sure, I enjoyed it and thought it was very good, if not great, but the best of all time? Hell no, at least not to me. At number 6, I have The Batman. In my opinion, this film is the pinnacle of what superhero movies should be. It's very entertaining and well-made technically, while feeling like a comic book, but not in the way that it overuses humor like the MCU films. What's funny about the film is how inherently silly some of the concepts within it are, and those concepts are balanced out with mature subject matter and universal themes of heroism that any of us can connect with. I've watched this film twice at this point, and I would happily watch it a third time. That's something that I can't usually say about superhero movies, let alone ones that are 3 hours long. Kicking off the top 5, I have the most underrated film of 2022, Fantastic Beasts: The Secrets of Dumbledore. The amount of people I've seen putting this on their worst lists is just absurd. This film disappointed me at first, but it's grown on me more and more over time. It's taken 2 rewatches for me to fully understand the complexity of the film and how intricately constructed the plot really is. There's an explanation for almost every plot hole that people claim there to be, and it continues the trend of the Fantastic Beasts series of tackling some pretty heavy topics. This film in particular explores corruption and the ways in which love can be toxic and damaging. A film about wizards and magical beasts has no right handling these themes as well as it does, but I think it succeeds with flying colors. At number 4, I have Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery. I don't think I enjoyed this film quite as much as Knives Out, but that's just because Knives Out is such a lightning-in-a-bottle movie that it's kind of difficult to recapture, and for the first third of this movie, I didn't think it would be able to recapture the magic of Knives Out. I honestly didn't like the first 30 minutes of this film. I thought the humor was pretty lowbrow and the setting wasn't nearly as engaging as the previous film. But halfway through this movie, there's a twist that completely recontextualizes everything that happened beforehand, and it remained a total blast from then on. Everything is paid off that was set up. Nothing is left unresolved. It's actually kind of astounding how well-rounded this film really is. At number 3, I have Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, a film that really came out of nowhere and shocked me with how great it is. This may just be my bias towards stop motion because it's my favorite form of animation, but I think this film does a fantastic job of retelling the story of Pinocchio in a new and fresh way. Guillermo del Toro really infused this film with his own personality, and it goes pretty deep into some very dark and mature concepts. It's really a film about death and the way that it affects different people, but it never becomes overly upsetting or dour. It's still very fun and charming at the same time. This movie was just amazing, and I can't recommend it enough. Coming in at number 2, I have Turning Red. I don't care what anyone says, this is my favorite film of the year. The animation is incredibly vibrant and expressive, with the use of many different animation styles being combined to perfectly convey the story and emotions of the characters. The story is very simple, but that isn't a problem because it is infused with Pixar's usual emotional complexity while still being hilarious at the same time. They really picked the perfect allegory with the red panda. Anything can be applied to it, and watching the behind-the-scenes documentary really does show how much of a passion project this was for Domi Shi and everyone else involved. And finally, at number 1, drum roll please, I have His Dark Materials Season 3. Yes, I know, Dark Materials is just making it to the top of all my lists this year, but my love for this show really can't be overstated. It's so well done on every level. The cinematography is fantastic, the casting is on point, there isn't a single weak link in that regard. The score is the best it's ever been, and I think the decision to release 2 episodes per week on HBO was a smart one, because it felt like I was constantly getting a movie's worth of the story, and I was constantly anticipating the next piece of the story without ever feeling disappointed by what I got. It's also just incredibly satisfying to finally see this story brought to life in the best way possible. As far as book-to-screen adaptations go, I think it's pretty hard to beat the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit films, but this show comes pretty close to rivaling those. I'm sorry, Harry Potter movie fans, but this show blows those films out of the water. While it may not be completely perfect, I think it's as close as we can get to that in the year 2022, and I have no problem calling His Dark Materials the masterpiece that it is. With all that being said, that is it for my ranking of everything that I saw in 2022. Thank you to everyone who stuck out this video until the end, because it's taken a lot of work on my part, and I really appreciate you guys watching. I suppose asking you to rank everything you've seen this year is a bit much, so if you feel like it, go ahead and let me know what your top 10 or 5 favorite movies or shows of the year are in the comments below. What did you think of my list? Do you agree with some of my choices? Do you disagree with some of them? Just whatever your thoughts are, please let me know them all in the comments below. And of course, as always, I hope you guys have a great day and a happy new year. Take care.